um, anyway, so we're looking at here, 595 is that total cost figure from their analysis on dryland corn, 537 on irrigated, and so on. So their numbers are different. So again, it really can make a difference if you're really keeping track of your actuals. If you're, really, I guess, being realistic about the figures that you plug in, where is that in your case? So good information, from them. And I always kind of look and see what they're including and versus what we are in that type of thing. So, okay. And this, you'll see, I usually present these about every year or so on different crops. And this is actually for just one crop budget. This is for corn budget number 23, which is a dry land, no-till budget. And it's 145 bushel expected yield that we plug in on that. All right. So going back, I've just got a chart here to show you the cash costs and how those have changed over time. And then the economic costs is the red bar. So we got the darker blue, sorry, and then the red bar. So we're showing what those costs are. And then the prices, I plugged in the prices. Now that is off of the crop insurance harvest price guarantee, all right? So we won't have that figure for 2025 until it's for the month of October. It doesn't show up. We don't really release that figure until February. And so, we don't have that figure. I plugged in here from cash price today from Frontier Co-op Adams, Nebraska, 389. So it just so happens, it's interesting, in 2024, if we're just looking at the difference on the economic side of things to the price, we added negative 26 cents this year. And actually for 2025, our costs per bushel went down, but we're looking at a 389. So we're still at that negative 26 cents. Now, what's it going to be for 2026? Who knows? If we plugged in the 389, we'd be at a negative 69 cents. Okay. So not to bring, bad news to you, but a lot of times it's like, we need to know what our costs are. And do we market based off of, at least know what our cash costs are versus our economic costs? Do we have that range? Do we have that in mind? So when we have opportunities with our 2026 production, to make some marketing decisions, we can do that. So, anyway, just to look back and, some thoughts as we look ahead, just as, again, this is a dry land corn budget. So we could do the same for irrigated corn. I also put together some information on a dry land soybean budget. And this is just a 50 bushel yield. Again, it's a no-till budget. We're looking at a 1041 price on from Adams Frontier Co-op today for December delivery. And if we were looking at that with our 2025 costs, cash costs and economic costs, we'd have a 61 cent over economic cost, 61 cent plus. But if that stayed the same and we are seeing these costs jump up for next year, what's that going to do for 2026? So it's really, I think, very important to really be watching what our numbers are and utilizing that information, to make some decisions. Now, maybe the decision is we plant more of a different crop. We, do some kind of alternative if we don't think we're going to have a profit from certain crops. All right. So just as a reminder, our ag budget calculator is at agbudget.unl.edu. So that is the link to actually get to the program. And if you haven't looked at it already, you can just create an account, go in and mess around with it. You can use it year after year after year. You can do some budgets for 25 yet or 26, and you can save those and duplicate those for future years and so on. But all you need to do is just enter an email and create a password, and then you have an account in the Ag Budget Calculator field to use that tool. Now, we do not use anyone's information. It's all private information. The only thing we have is your email, so I can stay in touch and let you know if there's updates. with the program. But we aren't going to use someone else's budgets and then publish those, because we don't know that if you've done them entirely, if you've put in all the information needed, if it's just partially done. We have no idea. Okay, so there's really no reason for us to utilize anyone's information in the system there. So, and then also we have a CAP, a dedicated page on CAP that Ryan helps keep up, cap.unl.edu/ABC. So there we do post training programs. So I can go in and show folks, kind of walk through with folks on how to enter, how to use the program. I got those scheduled sort of ongoing. So there'll be another one or two in November as my schedule allows. And I do post those, as well as Q&A sessions. So if you're working with the program, let's say you're trying to work on 2026 budgets, and maybe you did 25 budgets, you did those budgets, and you're like, okay, well, I'd really like to duplicate one of those budgets. I'm not quite sure what happens when that duplication, or how do I do that? Well, for one, I think I have a tutorial, because that's pretty important. There's a tutorial on that CAP page to understand how to do that. But if you have questions, just send me a note or hop on one of our Q&A sessions so it can go over with you on how to best utilize the program. So many of you have probably seen this. Just as a reminder, again, the program is web-based. I always suggest that people sit down at their laptops or their desktops and work with their budgets. And we're getting into that time of year as harvest is getting finished up, and we're looking ahead to 2026 to be doing those things. You can look at it on your mobile device, but obviously it's going to be easier to make changes and to really get things prepared sitting down at your computer. Again, we do have a place in those where you can download the university budgets. Keep in mind on the crop side of things that you can do, like, let's say you have 500 acres of dryland corn. You can do just one budget for that 500 acres of dryland corn, okay? Or you can actually split that out and say, well, I've got field number, I've got the north field versus, the south place, and so on. I can divide those things out, and I can really look at more particularly what those costs are on those different farms or fields, right? And then also we've got the livestock feature in there. But so you can download and then go in and customize those budgets. As I've already mentioned, we figure cash and economic cost of production. And so you can look at both. Once you've got some budgets in and you can run a report, you can look at the total cash costs or the total economic costs and work with those figures. In addition, we try to add in analysis, and we've got quite a number of analysis now already in the crop side of things. And we'll look at a few of those things here in a little bit, kind of what that all really means. And what we can do, because we really wanted this to be a budgeting program, but also a decision-making program, something that can help you with various decisions, so on. So we try to add those things in. And as I mentioned, we think it makes sense that once you know your cost of production, you can work with that and kind of do some marketing planning with it. And that's going to be one of our next phases to sort of help with some decisions, analysis, that kind of thing, moving forward with your marketing. And this is a list of those analysis. We've got break even, crop comparisons, sensitivity charts, and the risk analysis section, risk module, I call it, was set up for corn and soybeans in Nebraska. And so, and it really relates back to, what am I doing to mitigate risk? And we use crop insurance. And as we enter in different levels of crop insurance, we have choices. We have quite a few different choices. But if we enter in some basic choices and kind of look at how well am I going to be protected now that I know, or as I'm projecting my budget, I know my cost, but what does that scenario look like? So we've got that entered in. We actually we post articles, obviously on CAP quite often. And there is one that we did a few years ago on management decisions that can be made easier using the ag budget calculator. So basically as you're using enterprise budgets, what does that mean? How can you use those? And so we've got an article that kind of runs down what can be done with enterprise budgeting. So I checked not too long ago. We have over 2,200 accounts in the ABC program. Obviously, there's, a top 10, 15, 20% of users. And so we like to have feedback. So if you're one of those users, and we really like to know how it's working for you, we tried to make it pretty user-friendly, pretty intuitive to use. So it shouldn't be too difficult. We had someone, we like to get feedback. I ask every so often from our users to send us a note, let us know how they're using it. I had one guy, this was a couple years ago, but he used his information as he worked with his crop budgets to purchase some farm ground. This one was comparing crop performance in each field. He used it this last year to project his 2025 performance using standard projected numbers for report creation, and then using that information to work with his banker on his line of credit and for financing as well. So we get some really interesting feedback. Actually, I had one producer, and we do have a webinar on our CAP website where he actually looks at some base, sort of some base programming, some base scenarios on his operation, and then looks at what he's doing, and he uses the ag budget calculator for his different enterprises and makes some comparisons with that. And he actually ran through what he's doing in his operation and using this program. So I've already touched upon this, but let's kind of talk about what we can do with the enterprise budgets. And decision making is one of those things. Of course, understanding the very basics of doing an enterprise budget is to understand our cost production. We've already talked about it on a cash basis and economic basis as far as our costs go. But the pricing and marketing scenario, if I know that, I'm going to grow this crop for $3.50, $4, and when I have that opportunity to sell for $4.20, $4.30, whatever, that's going to help me maybe make some decisions or pull the trigger on doing some of that. Just to show you, this is a screenshot, and it's I picked the main parts. But when you get to a point, this is a number 33 corn budget. It's an irrigated budget, 275 bushel. We got 135 acres because of the pivot. The pivot covers that much ground. And see, here's that toggle between cash and economic. So if I wanted to just look at the cash side of things, I would just click the toggle. All right. So we can add in revenue, and that's one of the things that we haven't done. And when you look at university budgets, we do not put in the revenue. That would be something you'd need to do. And again, when we do this marketing module, folks can say, well, maybe 10% I might market at this price, 20%, as you're pricing along, you might have that scenario sort of laid out differently. But right now it's pretty static. And you can say, well, what if this next year I get $3.75 for my corn? There's also a place to put government payments. We don't know, actually always what that's going to be. But there's places for other revenue in there aside from the price. And so you can set that up and look at a scenario. You can decide, hey, I don't really want to look at the revenue side of things. I just want to see those costs. And so you can do that. So again, we have things organized. So you'll see the total operating costs, and there's a list, total operating cost, and that net return above operating. And then there's ownership and overhead costs. So ownership costs is where we're looking at that opportunity cost of investment. And what does that really mean? Well, for one, I think of machinery. I think you could have $1 million, $2 million easily or more, of course, wrapped up into machinery. And, you might own, a good chunk of that. You might be paying the bank for some, you might have debt on it. But let's say you own, 60% of that, we figure an opportunity cost, we keep our figure about 3%, but you could say, oh, well, if I sold that and I wasn't using all of that money I have tied up in equipment, I could put it in the stock market, I could put it on interest, and what would be that return? So when we're talking about opportunity costs, that is an ownership cost. as well as depreciation. So we've got, if we own that equipment, there is a cost, and it's getting used, it's getting worn. You know, you've got that cost to replenish, and that's part of ownership. And then overhead costs. So there is a place in our ag budget calculator to say, hey, this is so much an acre. Like this year, we're using $36 on irrigated ground for overhead costs, and that should cover some of your general insurance, general utilities, accounting fees, those kinds of things that you would split over various enterprises. So that figure is in there somewhere. And so we've got a total economic cost. In this case, we have it toggled to economic, and then the net return above economic cost. So that's kind of what our reports look like. And well, there's a lot more detail into it, but that's definitely a summary. All right, so after creating enterprise budgets again, then what? So again, decisions, hopefully we can make some decisions from our figures, and understanding our break-even figures, including allocated overhead costs. So this again is a screenshot. Now this is that dryland corn budget for 2026. And we were looking at 434 as our base. Our base yield was 145 bushel. We're looking at 434. This again, just an example and that's on an economic basis. Break even above total economic costs. All right. So on this page, in this analysis, I can say, okay, well, what if my yield changes by 15%? Now, again, I'm not considering might have payback on some of this, depending on my crop insurance choices. This is without the crop insurance decisions. But let's say, my yield drops 15%. I'd need 511 for that crop to cover those economic costs then. What if it changes to the positive 15%? So I've got 15% toggled in here. I'd be at 377. And you can see I can look between economic and cash, and I can actually adjust my costs beyond income crop sales. So let's say there's government payments or whatever, that could make some difference. And so I could have included that here as well. So again, just a screenshot to show you that that's there into the program. And then this we can compare enterprises too. If we've got some of our budgets in, let's say we've got soybeans and corn, and we even have some wheat, or we have some sorghum, we can take a look at what those costs are on each of those enterprises and do some comparisons. And we've got that built into the program. And then also, what if input prices change? So when I'm budgeting, I might budget fertilizer at a certain cost, and I see that changes. A few years ago, after we were coming out of COVID, we had some major changes in some input prices. We had things fairly low, and then things just really jumped up. So if I was sitting here saying, okay, and also one of the things that spurred us to do this was we had a situation where we weren't sure we were going to have glyphosate. Fertilizer costs were going up. We weren't sure we'd even have the supply. And so, people wanted to start to look at those comparisons, even of the soybeans and the corn. And so, so we built that in. So this is just a look at that. This is just a screenshot as well. But my base crop here is that dryland corn budget. Net return above operating costs, 287.16. That's just operating costs. I put in 440 in this case on that. And then I'm comparing my soybean, a dryland, no till after corn. No, this is conventional till, I guess. Okay. That was a different budget. Anyway, so here I can look at, okay, I would need at $11, I'd need to have the equivalent yield would be 47.6 bushel on soybeans to equivalent what my corn would do. Okay. And then if I had 55 bushel on that soybeans, I could have my equivalent price would be $9.51. So you kind of have to study those over, but we've got it built in here where if you've got these budgets in your account ready to go and you want to do some comparisons, you can do actually up to 4 crop comparisons. And then there is a spot in here that if I wanted to change one of those input prices on my base crop, I could do that. And so I don't show that here, but that is part of this crop comparison module. And so then we might want to ask, how sensitive are my projected returns to projected yield or price changes? So again, not taking into account crop insurance possibilities, but this is a little bit older chart. This is from 2025, but this is a sensitivity chart. So this is showing that our expected net return on this crop, we were looking at $63.53 an acre. And so anyway, so you can see here that the chart is set up that what if the price changes, goes from 450 and it goes down or it goes up, all right? And if you're in pink or in the, in the red, that's not as good. And then you can see that if my yield's going down or my yield's going up, how that changes things. Okay, sensitivity chart. I could have included some other income beyond crop sales in this scenario, and in this case, I did. I actually added $20 an acre from something, whether it be government payments or something. Added that in to before this was run. All right, so one of the big things that, as I mentioned, I probably sort of, it seems like we're staying fairly soft on the machinery costs, but that's really been a major expense. And when you look at those year after year, I look up some of the list prices on some of the basic kinds of equipment that we use in our budgets, and those list prices have gone up year over year. So I'd say this year there's probably a little bit more of an adjustment in equipment costs in our budgets. And what does that mean? Well, for one, I get questions quite often from people that do custom work. What should I be charging? Well, I'm definitely one of those folks to say, hey, we do have a custom rates report. We're getting ready to launch that survey. We do that every other year, but that'll be coming here shortly. We do have that information, but it's really important for you to run your figures on your equipment and understand what those costs are. And so that's built into the ag budget calculator as part of the cost. And then also labor needs and expenses relating to that are part of the program. So I just wanted to show you is that, so this was off of a 26, this was off of a soybean budget that I pulled here. And I, plugged in a medium-sized tractor and a boom sprayer, and I'm getting $8.51. Labor costs, we're figuring $27 an hour. Fuel costs, as I mentioned, are figured about $2.70 on diesel. But repairs, depreciation, and opportunity costs are part of the deal. These are ownership costs. Of course, we've got repair costs, and we use engineering formulas in the background on this in our budget system. But because keep in mind, if you have a piece of equipment, and over time the depreciation costs may be coming down, but your repair costs are going up. So those engineering formulas build some of those things in, and that's where we come up with some of these figures. Okay. So these are, you'll see $8.51 is pretty common in our budgets for this next year on just spraying operations. We're using a fertilizer spreader here, a no-till drill, our combine costs, what kind of what's behind the scenes in that list price, purchase price. We're using a Draper Flex platform. And I've seen those costs actually quite a lot higher depending on what equipment you're using, for harvest costs. You can easily put $1 million into harvest equipment, and what does that look like on a per acre, as well as our costs on running pivots, the cost of the pivot, repairs, the fuel costs, and so on. So this is a piece of the report when you're doing an enterprise budget. I showed you kind of that first page look. This is a page that I think is a really important page. And you could do some comparisons and say, well, do I need to own that expensive piece of equipment, or can I pay someone kind of on an equivalent basis, or, you know, it might be a little higher, but I'm not putting in my labor, my time, and I'm paying someone else to do it if they're available, and you can you know, have someone do custom work. So when I get folks ask me about what should they charge or what should they pay, we really ought to know what their costs are, because I'm always one to say you shouldn't be doing it if it's costing you. Okay, if you're spending your time and your equipment, you ought to be making sure those things are covered. So, all right. So then also we can go back and we can look at our list. So let's say, you know, I've got several folks and they're part of the owners or their family or they're hired. You know, this is just a report that gets spit back to us on how much, you know, what their time is worth, how we've set them up into the program. We can also look at our list of power units, our list of implements, our list of materials. So that's really nice. Let's say I have 10, 20 different, you know, crop enterprises. I got 10 different fields, and I can bring those all together in the whole farm scenario and get a whole farm report. And I could say, oh yeah, well, total here, I need this much fertilizer. So we've got that kind of report that we can run. All right, so then I mentioned the risk module. What if we have a crop loss, and what does that scenario look like? And so with that, we have again built in the crops for corn and soybeans across Nebraska by crop reporting district. You can, as you do your budgets, you can actually click on, you know, your area, put in your APH, put in your crop insurance choices, those premiums, and kind of look at what a scenario looks like if you're showing some kind of disaster. So this is a little report that you would get. This would again, this is just a sample from a year or two ago. Then my original projections show that I would be making this much on a net return above total costs. And after I run the scenario, even with some crop insurance, you know, there I'm losing $12,000, but I could have lost a lot more than that. And you can run these different scenarios on your risk in the risk module. So it's kind of an interesting a piece to it, actually. But you got to have your budgets set up, and then you can get good information in return. So so again, I've already mentioned that we can create a list of inputs and understand our cash needs. We have built into the ag budget calculator as well a cash flow statement, a month-by-month cash flow statement. So as you're working and on your field operations, let's say I do a burn down and I'm going to do that in that April timeframe, I would click on April, and then those costs associated, the materials that I purchase, the fuel that I use, that's going to show up in that April month. Same way with seed. Let's say that's in May. It's going to show up in the May month. And so I've started to create a cash flow. And then we made it so that we'll take a look here. Here's the materials list. I was mentioning that a little bit ago. So we've got that, the different products, and again, how much am I planning to use and what that cost is. So once I've got all my budgets in here, this is really a nice report. But here's a look at the cash flow feature. So you can see the materials, and anything that's red and underlined is clickable. So then I could see the whole list. If I opened this up, I could see, what's included in this figure. But you can see in the April-May timeframe, got a lot of costs running through. And again, this is kind of when I'm using it. Now, it's not necessarily when I paid for it. I might pay for it later, or I might have paid for it prior. And there's months that we could put in things prior. But we can move these figures. But what's really nice about this, it kind of helps set up, what our total costs are, and kind of in this organized fashion. And then we can work with it, move things around, and work with the cash flow. We do have this feature so that once you, bring this up in your, when you're ready, and you bring this up in your ag budget calculator, you can actually download it as a CSV file and put it in some spreadsheet, if that's how you want to work with your cash flow and prepare for your visit with your banks. The whole farm reports are pretty, this is just a summary report where I'm looking at my overall revenue and my total costs, and then what would be what's my net return. I can look at it on my enterprise basis. And there's some charts and so on that we've created in there. But then we also have, that numbers report. So it's kind of the same report, but it's got the detail. And it says mixed crops. So what I've done here is, in the whole farm, I brought together my corn, my soybeans, my wheat. I brought all of these enterprises together, and then I'm running a pro forma profit and loss, basically a look ahead report. Okay, so keep in mind that we, in addition to crops, we do have livestock and mainly cattle working right now, and so we're going to continue working with that. I can, if I've got a cow calf. And we talked about this the other night on the webinar, but I can actually then move those cattle or transfer those cattle over, at their weight and their value, and then show and take a look at what would go into them as feed and costs. And then, is it worthwhile moving them, into backgrounding, and then from backgrounding into finishing, so you can create different enterprises off of, like, let's say just a cow calf enterprise. But this is an example of a backgrounding. And then we're working on the specialty crop modules. So those that are grown, pumpkins, cucumbers, those that sell, we think too that understanding their cost of production is really important, so that they're setting prices and hopefully making some money when they have that opportunity. So, all right. Is there any questions from anyone? I'd like to, I guess also here again, I've got the link in here to that paper that we did on making management decisions using enterprise budgeting. But I also like to recognize that it's with the help of funders that we've been able to develop this program. The Nebraska Soybean Board actually helped kick this off several years ago. We've received Nebraska Corn Board funding, but multiple funding awards have come from the North Central Risk Management Education Center, which receives funds from USDA NEFA. And so we've had several awards to help develop our program, and we hope that continues. So, all right. I think with that.
That's great. Thank you, Glennis.
Hopefully we answered, we met what folks wanted to hear with this, but let us know if you'd like to know more or have any questions. Yeah. Okay.
I don't see a whole lot of questions coming in. Glennis, I'm going to ask you one though. So you mentioned that you can create cash flows from that. How difficult is that to do in the ag budget calculator if someone's wanting to do I just think this time of year is when a lot of people are pre-buying for next year and stuff, and they might want to kind of, put their numbers in and do like a projected cash flow type of deal. I know you kind of had a screenshot up there.
Yeah, it really makes sense.
Right.
And if you are going to be doing some kind of budgeting anyway, is to use this feature. So how difficult? It's really not that difficult to, again, once you've got, some budgets that you're working on. The way we've got the crop set up is that, again, you set up what crop it is, put in your acres. We have material inputs, so you can say, okay, this fertilizer costs so much, and so on. And so we basically go off of field operations when it comes to the crop side of things.
Okay.
So, so as I mentioned, like a burn down example, in a burn down example that I might be doing in the, April timeframe or thereabouts, is that I'm using a machine. I've got some labor costs because I'm running it. I've got a power unit and implement. I've got fuel costs. and the material costs. So I've got those things that I'm applying. And so you would say that in that month, I'm doing this work. And so the labor costs associated with that field operation would show up in that April timeframe, and the fuel cost would. So you can see, like again, if this is a crop, primarily a crop farm, right? That a lot of their costs are going to show up in the April, May timeframe. But now, as I mentioned, though, you really ought to cash flows or design are meant to be so that you can actually move to say, well, I prepaid, $10,000 worth of fuel. So once this is done, I've got 34,000 as my total. I could like back out 10,000 of this and put it that I paid for it in January. I paid for it in the prior, because it actually goes back several months. You don't see that right here, but so you move these things around while you're here, and or you can download all of this data, and there's quite a lot. If you open these up,
Okay.
if you there's a lot of data, and you could basically dump that into, like your Google Sheets or your Excel or whatever off of a CSV file and work with it. So, because
Nice.
here, what's really nice is it really is telling us this is what you're anticipating those costs to be. Here's your grand
Right.
total of, this cash you're going to use, because we don't have in here the depreciation. It's a non-cash cost. If you were going to
Right.
buy a tractor or buy something, capital, there's a line for capital that we don't see on here right now, but you could add that in. So anyway, so it's just an added feature, and it's kind of neat that it's capturing all that I am anticipating spending and doing, at least with on the top side of things right now. Okay.
Yeah, and I'm just selfishly, I'm gonna say I really enjoy this aspect when working with producers because it kind of helps them plan, oh, like I need, I don't know, $10,000 or $2,000 or what is it, $33,000 for materials in April that I'm planning on spending. So I know kind of when I have expectations of cash inflows and outflows, which I just think is so helpful for planning. So
So thanks for that question, but it is a really kind of a neat feature
it
program.
is super cool. So thank you so much for joining us, Glennis.
Thank
And
you.
thank you to everybody else for joining us today during Egg Smart Money Week. The free webinars continue through Friday, and you can find the schedule and registration information at cap.unl.edu/smartmoney. Thank you again, Glennis, for joining us, and have a great afternoon, everybody.
Thanks.